There we go. All right. So first key point, really easy, really straightforward, very obvious. World War I, global conflict, first war between major powers in the 20th century. And it was fought from the years 1914 to 1918. So really brief key points. I'll give you about a minute for that. When you're done with the key point, can somebody in the chat, publicly, privately, doesn't matter. Why am I making sure to point out that this is the first conflict between major world powers? What does that mean? In the 20th century. Why am I pointing out the 20th century? So like, what's the significance of the term 20th century? Like, what's the context? And why is it important that I'm talking about major world powers? When you're done with the key point, please in the chat, what do you think? I'm asking what you think. Let's see what we remember from world history. Like, why does this stuff, why does it matter that it's world powers fighting for the first time in the 20th? And why does it matter that it is the 20th century? So about another 45 seconds on the key points, and then I'll give you a little bit of time to get in that response in chat. Why do you think this is happening? Or why do you think it's significant, I should say? Why am I pointing out that it's world powers fighting? So because it's not the first one, it's been a while since there's been one. I'll give you that. It's been a couple hundred years since there's been a war between all the powers. I'll give you that. What else? Like, why am I pointing out that it's major powers? What do major powers? World powers. New knowledge, new weapons. Yes. First major conflict with devastating modern technology. That is awesome. Yes. So you have modern technology, right? You have things like machine guns. You have things like artillery that can actually hit what you aim it at. It's not just a cannon firing a ball, right? Why is it important that, yeah, kaboom. Why is it important that I'm pointing out that it's world powers? So what's the difference between like this war and say the British wars in Africa during this time period? Because Britain's a major power, but who are they fighting in Africa? In those colonial wars, like who are they fighting against? Africa doesn't have the same technology, exactly, right? So like one side has machine guns, the other side doesn't, right? They're fighting tribes of natives, right? They're fighting aboriginals. One side has machine guns, the other doesn't. In the case of the Russo-Japanese War, you have one side that's really, really modern and ready, and the other side that's too slow to start up, and they start losing, right? Exactly. So good job. Good pointing that out. So what you have here is the first time that all of the major powers of the world are evenly matched, right? They have new technology and they're all fighting. Right, exactly. Everybody has the same style of guns, right? Everybody's got machine guns. Everybody's got artillery. Everybody's got all this stuff. And they're going to clash and it's going to be really explosive. So I said this at the top of the class, but just in case for those people that are late, other than the key points and a couple of the key terms, most of these early slides are just context. You do not need to write them down because they are not relevant to the United States. I just want to give you guys the context for the war, refresh it, so that way we can get into how the US is affected by all this stuff. So like for this slide, you don't really need a lot of info here. I wouldn't write any of it, honestly. But just know European countries are all tied up in this web, right? There's like this big webby mess of alliances and deals and treaties. And if you go to war, we'll help you. And if you go to war, then they'll help you. And like, it's all of this big jumbled up mess. And one thing to note, and you might want to add this, but you don't need to. For the first time in a long time, right, historically, Britain and France have been enemies, right? They fought literally 2 wars that are called the 100 Years' Wars. But now, Britain and France are friends, like kind of. And Russia and France have always been friends, but now Russia and Britain are friends. So for the first time, you have these 3 large powers, France, Russia, and Britain, that are all on the same team. And then what's going to be the match that blows up the powder keg, the match that sets all this off, that leads to Europe kind of, exploding in war? Austria-Hungary, old dead empire, don't got to know much about it now. And their heir to the throne, Franz Ferdinand, were touring through Serbia, doing, Archduke stuff. And Serbian nationalists assassinated. And when Archduke Franz Ferdinand is killed, the Austro-Hungarian Empire will immediately start going to war with Serbia. I think they start shelling like a few days later. This is the actual tunic of Franz Ferdinand. This is a real photograph. So what they do with a lot of these old World War I photos now, World War II also, but is they're colorizing them, right? They're going like in post, and I don't know how it works. Like graphic designers are, yeah, it's true. Well, we'll get into that in a second. That's actually a really good point. But so these are all real photos. So if you see a colored photo, don't think, is that fake? Is that an actor? That's a real photo. That's actually Franz Ferdinand. They just colored it in. Yeah. So funny story about this war starting, right? There was an attempted assassination on him that failed. Somebody threw a bomb into the road. It's a wax statue. Is that a wax statue? I know I have other ones here that are real, so that maybe that one is wax. But like I got some of these, like these are real. So maybe you're right. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about sometimes, you know? So, but that is the tunic. That's the blood stain. I do know that. Maybe, you know what? It might be wax now that I'm looking at it. That mustache looks too pointy. I'm just playing, you know. I have no idea too. I don't know about this photo because this one was new. I know these are all real. I have the books where these are from, but I don't know about that one. So you might have me on that. But I don't know it's real because there's no background. If this was a wax statue, you'd be able to see the little museum in the back. I have no idea, Alex. Now you have me questioning myself. You have me questioning life and everything else. Anyways, Franz Ferdinand tried to kill him. Didn't work. He goes back on the road in his car. Driver takes a wrong turn. One of the assassins is walking by all depressed, sees him, pulls his gun, unloads into the car. Franz Ferdinand is dead. I believe the wife dies. And then bam, World War I starts. So that's why the war is going to begin. The first dominoes that fall, right, whatever you want to say, Austria-Hungary goes to war with Serbia. And then there's going to be some reactions afterwards. Two sides, Triple Entente, allies, and the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, later Bulgaria. Triple Entente is Britain, France, and Russia. Domino effect. It really is, though. Because, and I'll leave this on the side. You may or may not want to write these in case you forget, right? It's Central Powers, Triple Entente, allies. You can call them allies, but you might want to recognize Triple Entente. It's French, but it is literally a domino effect because what's going to happen is Austria-Hungary is going to start fighting Serbia. Russia, who consider themselves the defenders of Serbians, not kidding, will invade and start a war with Austria, will declare war on Austria-Hungary. Germany, who's like best buddies with Austria-Hungary, is going to declare war with Russia. But for reasons that we're going to get into, right, they're worried about France because, as you can see, Germany is kind of surrounded by enemies on all sides, which leads to a plan, which leads to some execution, which leads to invasion of Belgium, which leads to all sorts of nonsense. One thing I want to point out is really important. This is something a lot of people tend to overlook or forget or not realize. There isn't really a bad guy in World War I. At least not in the beginning, right? There's no, sure, there's bad PR. Sure, there's the aggressors and the, you know, response and all that stuff. One side starts the war, but this isn't like World War II where you're literally fighting Nazis and Hitler, right? There's no like evil acts. There's no atrocities other than general war atrocities that are already happening. This war starts in the way a lot of those older wars started. And for reasons that we're going to get into, right, that's one of the things that the Second World War does to overshadow this first one is that, at least early on, there really aren't any bad guys. Now, it's going to be a really costly war. It's going to be really devastating and horrible. And because of that, the powers that are in the Central Powers, the losing powers, are going to be severely punished, more so than they would have ever been before. And so let's get into it. Key point 2. It's a blend of old world mentality with new world technologies. I showed you those images earlier, and we'll talk about them in a little bit, right? But the only way you're going to break the old school way of thinking that a lot of these military leaders, a lot of these generals, a lot of these politicians have is through learning hard lessons. People are going to die. It's going to be horrible in ways that Europe has never seen before. So previous to this conflict, probably one of the better conquerors in recent-ish times would have been Napoleon, right? French emperor. And he used to boast to other armies when they were about to fight, you can't beat me, right? I spend 30,000 lives a month, right? Basically saying, hey, I lose 30,000 guys every month, no sweat, not a big deal. You can't beat my army. When France and Germany meet in 1914, they're going to lose 30,000 lives in a day. And it's going to be really devastating in ways that nobody understood, nobody was prepared for, nobody was ready for. So I'll give you a quick 40 seconds while I go empty my tea thing here, and then we'll keep going. So keep that in mind. All right, so a little bit more time. But again, it's old world thinking, new world technology. The French, as you saw, will go to war in 1914 wearing bright red pants and bright blue coats. The cavalry will still be wearing horse-haired helmets, carrying swords, and having giant armor plates, like knight armor, right? You saw the picture. Those are real photos. That's really how they went to war in 1914. They didn't know any better. And a lot of these lessons are going to be learned the hard way. People are going to realize, oh, I can't just charge a machine gun post with cavalry horses. That doesn't work. And, you know, they're going to have to learn that, no, it doesn't work. In fact, when you run at a machine gun, doesn't matter how fast your horse is, you're going to catch a bullet or two, right? Or 30. All right. So I'm going to move forward. Like I said, French, this is all French. These are all French soldiers. The colorized photos are real photos. They're black and white like these. But this is somebody, I think it's some artist or some historian, I forgot who, that colorizes these. And they're really cool looking. This is 1913, by the way. This is like training maneuvers. But if you think that, oh, by 1914 they fix it, this is them in 1914 on the War March. Still wearing the armor plates, still wearing the crazy helmets, horsehair helmets. And they're on horses in red pants and blue coats, going out to where they're literally walking targets, guys. Literally walking targets. Why is wearing bright colors not a good idea anymore? Why was it okay back in the day, not okay now? It's really obvious, but like, why? What's the big difference? There's new guns, right? And those new guns have what that the other guns didn't. Accuracy, range. You can actually hit your target from far away now. That like sniping, the concept of sniping is going to become a thing here. These are what the infantry would have looked like. Still in the blue, still in the red. This is a little later in the war. This is meant to be, I think this is like 1915, 16. But also notice that with the exception of these guys that are wearing ridiculous, like Roman style helmets almost, no, they're not wearing like metal helmets. They're still in cloth caps. And most of the armies in 1914, 15 will be in cloth caps. Nothing to protect your head from impact, from shrapnel, from bullets. Not that helmets are bulletproof, but they're more bulletproof than a cloth hat is. So again, these are what the armies looked like in 1914. Yes, you see, you laugh, but it's true. In fact, there's a really interesting point that a lot of officers early on, because back during this time, especially in 1914, like the first couple months of the war, the officers still wore like fancy white gloves, big white hats, and still carried swords and like stood up and like officers are getting sniped 360 no scope left and right in the beginning of the war. They're losing so many because they're standing there leading, being officers, and they're just getting shot. Like that happened. Like that was a thing. People don't know how to fight wars with modern technology yet. And the way they're learning is people are getting shot. And it's kind of horrible to think about, but it's a big change. Well, that's funny. Okay, so it's rough. It really is. And again, you don't need to write any of this. I would just define Schlieffen-Plan so you know it. But we already said, right, Austria-Hungary and Germany going to war with Russia, but Germany being nervous decides, well, here's what we'll do. We'll knock out France with one blow, and then we'll turn around and we'll fight Russia, right? That's the basics of the Schlieffen-Plan. And it's like a big sledgehammer swing, 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 and bam, you knock out Paris, France quits, you turn around, you fight Russia. This is old 19th century ways of thinking. This is how they beat France in the Franco-Prussian War. And Germany used to be Prussia, which is why they have all these old militaristic traditions. And it's why their armies are really good, by the way. Some historians, and I tend to lean and agree with them, will argue that like the World War I German army is better than the World War II one. The World War I German army fights the entire world by themselves for a long time, for 4 years, right? And depending on who you ask, may or may not have won at certain points. But there's a certain point where it becomes hopeless. But it's not like the World War II army where the second that the U.S. gets involved, right, and a little later, it's very clear that they are doomed to lose that war. Like, it's not the case here. Till very, very late in the war, there's a chance that either Germany or the Allies will win. And it's not till the end when the U.S. gets involved that those chances are gone. But the problem with the Schlieffen-Plan and why it's an issue and why it brings in France and Britain into the war because they have to violate Belgian neutrality. Jose, you got a question?
Yeah, is like okay. So is the World War One army from Germany only like better than the World War Two army from Germany since the U.S. didn't get involved?
So what I mean by that is that it's a better made army. Like the World War II German army is really flashy, and it's got tanks and it's got all that stuff. So if you pit them against each other, no, they won't. Like one won't beat the other. Not anymore. You can't do that anymore, right? But for its time, the German army in this war is bigger.
It's pretty advanced.
It's better. Well, not only that, but what they have that a lot of the other armies don't is they're really well trained and they're really well led. And I'm not kidding when I say they fight the other three countries by themselves. Like the Western Front, all the red is Germany, the blue is everybody else. And they fight them by themselves for 4 years. Whereas like in World War II, right, the second that Hitler starts losing in the Soviet Union, the second that America gets involved, the World War II is all just losing it, right? It's all till eventually that they capture Berlin. That army doesn't have like, the best way I've heard it described, the World War I army can give a punch and take a punch. The World War Army can only give a punch. They can't take a punch. Once you punch them, they're down. They're gone. They have a glass chin. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's why I would say that this army tends to be, it doesn't get enough respect. It doesn't get enough credit for being as good as it was. Because it was really good.
It was pretty good. It was pretty well structured.
Very well structured. In fact, it was probably one of the better structured armies of them. They did stuff with their reserves that armies weren't doing yet. So Belgian neutrality is violated. Germany's like, hey, Belgium, can we march through your territory? And Belgium's like, no. Germany's like, please. Belgium's like, no. Germany's like, okay. And then they invade. And Belgian forts try to put up a fight. It's very resilient for how small Belgium is, but Germany brings in some big guns, blows up the forts. Forts are now obsolete. And Germany invades France anyways. So here's some German troops. This is the gun that blew up Belgian forts, by the way. It's called the Paris gun, I believe. German artillery is like middle artillery, medium. Actually, that might be light. No, I think it's medium. And then here are some Imperial German troops, as they would be called. This one's huge. This gun, guys, they had to be like football fields away to shoot it, like hundreds of yards away, and they still had to like cover their ears and their eyes in cotton. And they had to be like 2 or 3 football fields away to shoot it. When they planted it down, they had to pour concrete so it wouldn't like, break itself. Yeah, it's a ridiculous gun. Like it's obscene. And it was designed to bust through forts. And that's what it did. These forts are not like wooden forts. They're steel and concrete. And they look like, if you guys have ever looked up like the Maginot Line, that's like the proto-Maginot Line, but in Belgium. And so the Germans come up against it and they're like, okay. And then they chill. They bring up their big gun and they blow them all up. There's really cool reports or letters you can read of like people describing what it's like to be in one of these forts that explodes. But yeah, so giant gun, like obscenely giant. And then these are like regular, like medium to light artillery pieces. Again, field gray, again, post-colorized images, pretty cool. There's a film, a documentary. It's a bad documentary. Like the documentary part of it, the sound, the voiceover is not very good. But the footage is really cool because they take old World War I footage and they just like make it HD. I think it's Peter Jackson that does it. Okay, so trench warfare. These are all photos from 1915, very early on. Trenches will get more intricate and more advanced. But all you got to really know about trench warfare is one, it's horrible. Mud, rats, dysentery, explosions, gunfire, poison gas. Trench foot, which is basically where your foot rots within your boot while you're still walking around on it. But the big thing about trench warfare, what trench warfare does is it kills the old mythology of like glorifying warfare, right? So like, to give you an example, Teddy Roosevelt, who loved warfare, wanted to go fight in this war. He was too old. He had asthma. They didn't let him go. But the people that think the way Teddy used to think, the people that think war is okay, war is a good thing, war is an honorable, good thing. Not that people who fight wars aren't honorable, but the idea of like war is a good thing, you should do it, it'll put hair on your chest. Like everybody should go to war a little bit. That dies here. The people that are fighting in these trenches, and these are all French troops that fight in this war, don't want anybody else to have to go through it, right? They very quickly start to realize, oh, this isn't okay. Like, it's not safe. It's dangerous. You know what I mean? And it's PTSD, concepts like this start to come up now. I don't know if you guys had like grandparents, like my grandfather that fought in World War II. When he was like later in life, when he was getting dementia and stuff, he used to like call for his sons and a lot of like like me and a couple of the older, kids, like kids, grandkids and stuff that he knew. And he'd be like, don't let them take them. Like they're like stuff like that. Like where the concept of like, hey, going to war isn't a good thing is starting to come here. Does that make sense? Like I need a yes or no, because I kind of rambled there. The concept of, hey, let's go to war. It's great. It's good for everybody. Like that dies. That goes away. The horrors of trench warfare and what this conflict will bring show and breed a new generation of people that are not okay with it, right? The officer that's wearing his white gloves, that's standing up with his sword pointed out at the other trench, getting shot in the face. Like that's going to go away. People are going to be like, hey, put your head down, or somebody's going to shoot it out, right? You can see right here, like the rifle butt inside the like metal plate. It's a very different type of warfare, and it devastates and it ruins the landscape. A couple more images. This is a heavy artillery gun. That's British. Yeah, British. This is late war. This is like 1718 for sure. German soldier hiding in the trenches. A couple of dead French guys. Tell from the helmets. These are French trench raiders. This is really cool. So they'd have their knives, they'd have like a little pocket full of grenades and stuff. And they would sneak across no man's land, like really slow, like an inch at a time, like belly worm crawl. And hopefully nobody saw them. And if nobody saw them, they'd go across the other trench, throw some grenades, shoot a couple of guns, stab some people, and then they'd jump and run back and try to get away. They would do that at night and stuff. So these are trench raiders. That's why they're in the gas masks. Weird stuff that you don't see in conflicts anymore. Western Front, just really quick. This is as far as Germany gets, and it's in 1914. They almost make it to Paris. Some troops say they can see it in the distance, but they never quite get there, and eventually they're pushed back, and different offenses back and forth for tiny pieces of land. Chat, what's this? Somebody in the chat. What's this a picture of? Why is it called no man's land? Like, what? Yes, it's no man's land. This used to be a forest, and I should have gotten a picture of the forest. It's my fault. It's the area between two trenches. Exactly. So why is it a no man's land? You guys are right, but what makes it a no man's land? If you walk out there, what happens? Yeah, if you try to cross it, you're going to die, right? Artillery, machine gun fire, sniper fire. You cannot go out here. Yeah, no man can cross it, right? You're going to die if you go out here. This used to be a full forest of trees, and I should have gotten the picture. And it's devastated through artillery and poison gas and all sorts of horrible stuff. You walk out there, you're getting doomed. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, you don't cross no man's land, right? But this is a very unique circumstance. This is a World War I only circumstance. Why? Mustard gas, yeah, you're true. Like, why doesn't this happen in World War II? Why aren't there no man's lands? What changes? What do you think changes? I know you guys, this isn't military history class, but like, why does it change? Why is this trenches stop being used? Sure, but why? What breaks trenches? What innovation like makes trenches useless? Nope. Tanks, right? By the end of this conflict, but more so because at the end of this conflict, they're not that useful. They're like big buses that break down all the time. But like in World War II, everybody's got tanks, right? A tank can stroll through no man's land, no problem. And so no man's land is one of those weird things that's only a World War I thing. Because sniping stays around, machine guns stay around. The idea of I'm not going to wear my armor and horse-haired helmet to war stays not there, right? But no man's land is specific to this conflict. Well, you say that, but like the idea of like the radio and stuff makes it to where like, so if you guys don't know, and I'll say this really briefly before we move on, the way you attacked other trenches is you'd have to call your artillery, but you couldn't call them. You'd have to send a letter to your artillery or plan ahead of time. They would fire on the other trench. And when they were done, you'd get out of your trench and run towards the next trench. And your fingers crossed and you're hoping that they don't in their trench get up, get their machine guns and mow you down. That's how offensives worked. That's why so many people died in the middle of no man's land. Late in the war, people will realize, hey, keep shooting at them till we're halfway across the field, and then, stop shooting, and then we'll get. But that's like the last months of the war. Nobody realizes that till later on. Also, they don't have the technology to do it. So part of why you don't see no man's lands, part of why you don't see trenches being utilized in the same way, is because quick radio call, hey, can you blow those people up? They're in a trench over there. Okay, right? And that's it. You're done. You don't have to do it anymore. Also, aircraft. Planes are going to make that obsolete too, because early in the war, even late in this war, when there are biplanes, they don't do the same thing that like prop planes in World War II will do. So key point 3, now we're getting into the US centered stuff. Now we're going to need to start filling in our notes a little more fully, right? Initially, the US stays neutral. They don't want to get involved. We don't get involved in European wars with the United States, yada, yada, yada. But Germany is going to keep putting on the pressure from doing German things. And President Woodrow Wilson will eventually ask Congress for a declaration of war in order to make the world safe for democracy. And President Woodrow Wilson will get his declaration of war. So I'll give you a quick minute for key point 3. And then we'll move on. So all that early stuff, again, context, right? It's setting up where the U.S. is going to come into play. Because for the first 2.5, 3 years, the U.S. just isn't involved. They're doing American things. They're living happily, right? They got temperance movements and, anti-saloon leagues. They don't got time to worry about war in Europe. Anybody already know what Germany's going to start doing to mess that up? And if you don't, it's okay. But Germany's going to be doing a thing. That's World War II. Germany's going to start doing a thing that's going to, also even in World War II, that doesn't affect the US, but they're going to do a thing that they did in World War II. They do it here. No, that's okay. It's okay if you don't remember. We'll move on in about, nope, got the gas. We get involved because somebody starts messing with our stuff. So let's move on. Grab a quick screenshot if you need it. Germany does this thing. They did it in the First World War. They did it in the second one, called unrestricted submarine warfare. They get in their U-boats, which are undersea boats, U-boats, and they declare where the war zone is. Yeah, they sunk our boats, right? They declare where the war zone is. And if you're a vessel and you're in the war zone, Germany's going to sink your boat. Doesn't matter what you're there for. Doesn't matter if you say, oh, we're a transport ship. Oh, we're a merchant ship. Blah, 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 blah. We're from the United States. Germany's going to sink it. And so that's what Germany's doing. The worst of these was the Lusitania, which was a passenger ship that killed 128 Americans. After the Lusitania, Germany stops for a little bit because the United States is like, if you don't chill, we're going to break relations and we're going to go to war. And then Germany's like, okay. But then Germany starts up again because they're trying to prevent shipping. They're trying to prevent supplies to the Allies. They start up again and they're still sinking American ships. I'll do it again. Yeah, so some people say, and it's been said like that ship was harboring British supplies, I think. But even if it is, which to be fair it is, right? They're still killing Americans. And now they're doing it on purpose. I'm not saying, but again, this goes to the thing about how there really aren't bad guys in the First World War, right? It's one of those things where it's like, hey, but you had supplies, but you're killing civilians. And it's like, it's back and forth where the Germans are doing it and the Americans are like, stop. And the Germans are like, no. And they keep doing it, right? And so but this doesn't start the war on its own. This is a big deal. And this is what gets the public and what gets the president and a lot of people upset. But this alone does not get the US in the war. It's a big reason why. But this alone doesn't do it. Side note, remember, right? Americans since post-revolution have always had this thing of like, I don't care if Europe's at war, we get to trade with whoever we want without consequences. So when other countries don't allow that, like Germany or like France and Britain earlier on, Americans get upset. This is the same thing, but this isn't what's going to cause the war. So I'll give you a quick minute and a half. Define unrestricted submarine warfare and make sure you mention the Lusitania. There's going to be another incident that Germany does that is going to directly lead, like this thing's going to happen, and then in the United States is like, okay, war. Okay, we'll go to war. That's fine. And it's going to be this next thing that's going to happen. So about a minute and change, and we'll talk about it. About 45 seconds. So again, sinking of the Lusitania, 128 Americans killed, 1915. Overall strategy of unrestricted submarine warfare is very upsetting to a lot of Americans. If we want to sell supplies to whoever you want, like we should be able to. Like that's a very American way of looking at it. But to make matters worse, to make it all so horrible, Germany does a thing, and it's a Hail Mary. It's one of the biggest Hail Marys I've ever seen in geopolitical war gaming, so to speak. And that's something called the Zimmermann telegram, where Germany will send a message to Mexico and be like, hey, psst, Mexico, you want to invade the United States? Hey, if you invade the United States and like distract them for us, when we beat the rest of the powers in Europe, we'll go help you. Psst, promise, okay? And then what happens is Mexico's like, I don't want to do that. And then what really happens is that the United States intercepts the telegram, and the United States sees the message, and then they're like, mm-mm. And so right after that, Woodrow Wilson will ask for a declaration of war. He will get it. And yes, Germany messed up. And the Zimmermann telegram directly leads to the United States entering the war against Germany. So it does the opposite. It backfires, right? It does the opposite of what Germany wants. Germany's whole goal is, hey, we keep sinking American boats and they're getting really angry. Mexico, you want to invade them? And then Germany's like, ah, crap, they saw it. And then the United States enters the war in 1917. So the Zimmermann telegram defined what it did, and it leads directly to the United States entering the war against Germany. Yeah. We did. We really did. Like, yeah, and to be fair, there's like reports of like Mexico was like not at all entertaining this idea. But just like it wouldn't have mattered. Like right away, they knew. This was intercepted right away. Like it's not like Mexico actually had time to be like, should we, shouldn't we? Because the United States was already like, Germany, really? And Germany's like, what? You know? And so this will lead to the conflict. The U.S. will enter the conflict because of the Zimmermann telegram on top of all of that submarine warfare. Side note, if you guys want to see what that submarine warfare looked like, that Tom Hanks movie, what's it called? Greyhound. Really good movie. It's a destroyer crew fighting submarines. It's really cool. Really good. We'll go another 40 seconds or so on here, and then we'll move on. Okay, almost done, guys. I know we're running low on time, but we're almost there. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. Key point 4. Yep, pretty much. Yeah, that's what Germany did. They sent the wrong message to the wrong person. Although the American Expeditionary Forces played a relatively small role in the conflict. Oops, wrong number. Yeah, that's what Germany did. They're like, oops, wrong number, sorry. But so yeah, American forces, like military forces, they play a small role in combat very late in the war. By the time the U.S. gets there and mobilizes, the major offenses are all pretty much done. But the very entry of the United States on its own will tip the balance in favor of the Allies. And I'll explain that a little more on the next slide, and we'll talk about what exactly that means so you get that down. But so just keep that in mind, right? Like American troops, it's not World War II. They do not do the heavy lifting in this conflict. But their very entrance in the conflict will lead to them doing some heavy lifting a little bit later on. And their very entrance will make it to where it's a hopeless battle for Germany, and eventually will lead to the surrender. So a little bit more time. And then we'll move on. We'll go about 20 seconds. Let me know if you need more time than that. All right, let's move forward. So let's get into the actual American military involvement. So they're led by a guy named John Pershing, General John Pershing, and they're only in the war for about 20 months. So the United States is only in the war, troops on the ground for about 20 months. Initially, when they first arrived, they're used to like plug holes where British lines are weak, British French lines. But soon Americans get their own section of the line, right, of their own portion. Now, the United States tips the balance of the war in favor of the Allies, but there's a reason for that. So in, let's say, 1917, 1918, and I'm going to use a boxing analogy here, but Britain and France and Germany are like two really exhausted boxers. They've been fighting 12 rounds. They're gassed out. They've been giving it all they got, and no one's won yet. And that's kind of where you're at near, like at the end of the tail end of this war. Both sides are exhausted. Both sides are depleted. Both sides are weakened. But because both sides are evenly weakened, it's still anybody's game. Does that make sense? Like Germany still has a puncher's chance. The Allies still have a puncher's chance. And then what will happen is the United States is a fresh new body. They're a new nation, right? They have not been exhausted of resources, of manpower, of supplies the way the other nations have. And yeah, you're not wrong. Like they're excited to go to war. They haven't learned the hard lessons that the European nations have learned, right? They're not all doom and gloom. They're all amped up. They're excited, like, hey, let's go to war. Let's go beat up some Germans, those Huns, right? All this stuff. And because of that, once the United States enters, the way they tip the balance isn't from action alone, but their very presence on the battlefield and their very presence among the Allies makes it to where Germany does not have that puncher's chance anymore, right? Because even if they deliver a knockout blow to save France, the United States is now can supply like way more troops because they're fresh. So the very presence of the United States entering the war pretty much dooms the Germans. Up until the U.S. enters the war, though, it's anybody's game. Regardless of how depleted they are, it's anybody's game. So the war will officially end in 1918 with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, is greatly involved with the outcome, especially early on. So I'll give you a quick minute and a half, and then we'll get into what I mean and why, and what happens to Woodrow Wilson, because there's a fun, interesting game you can play where it's possible that if Woodrow Wilson had stayed as sharp as he was early on, that he could have, like, you never know. World War II might have never happened. We'll get into why and how in a little bit. Those are American troops, by the way. I know they're wearing British helmets, but they had to borrow them. America didn't know how to make a lot of this stuff, so like they had to borrow like French machine guns, French tanks, British helmets. The rifles were American, and I believe very late I don't think the machine guns aren't American. Machine guns are borrowed. I think that's a Maxim. That's a Vickers Maxim, I think, that he's carrying. And I know the submachine guns they used were French. But those are, yeah. So it's the rifles, the uniforms. Everything else they kind of borrow. They don't really know how to make all this stuff yet. That's why, like in World War II, nobody takes them seriously, right? Remember, well, we talked about it when we talked about Pearl Harbor. Herman Goering's like, hey, Americans, they don't make warplanes, they make refrigerators. That's where they get the reputation of like, they don't know how to fight a war yet. That's where it comes from, because they don't actually know how to fight one in 1918. And all of the other powers already know how, and they're pretending like they weren't showing up to war with armor on in 1914. It's funny. How much time we got? Oh, time is up. All right, let's move forward. Here's an American machine gun crew, and these are some American artillery pieces. World War I, old school stuff. Again, more modern artillery and cannon. Machine gun crew. Yep. All right. Key point 5, last key point of the day, guys. Just about done. Despite Woodrow Wilson's, that's funny. Woodrow Wilson's deep involvement in post-war negotiations, the United States Senate will refuse to ratify the Treaty of Versailles or the League of Nations. So Woodrow Wilson, we're going to talk about it. It'll be even more ironic as we talk about it. But the Senate's going to refuse to ratify the Treaty of Versailles and join the League of Nations. We'll go about 20 more seconds, then we'll move on. All right. So once the war is over, Britain and France very specifically want to punish Germany. They want Germany to suffer because they blame Germany for the start of the war. Even though we kind of already talked about there really aren't any bad guys in the First World War, Britain and France are going to blame Germany. They're going to try to make the Central Powers, and Germany specifically, pay for this war and be punished for it. Don't ever do it again type of stuff. Now, Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States, part of what is also significant about the U.S. entering the war when they did is, despite only being there at the end, well, we'll get into them doing it again. So despite of the United States only getting there at the end, they get a full seat at the negotiation table because they're a very respected power, and everybody knows part of why the war ends as quickly as it does is because the U.S. is standing there ready to go. And regardless of how green the troops are, regardless of how much they would have needed to learn, it is a fresh, as much as I hate using this, right? Like fresh set of bodies, fresh set of personnel, people, population that would have devastated Germany if the war had continued. So they know this. Everybody knows this. So the U.S. is in part responsible for the war ending as quickly as it did. So Wilson gets a seat at the table with the big boys. And he doesn't want to punish Germany. He doesn't think Britain and France should punish Germany because he's like, hey, this is all y'all's fault. All y'all started this war. So he proposes something known as the 14 points plan. And some of those points included freedom of the seas. Hey, stop sinking boats, Germany. Talking to you. Germany, I'm looking at you. Stop sinking boats. Self-determination of nations, right? Hey, if you're a country, you should be able to decide who rules you, right? And then something called the League of Nations, which is a representative body with all of the nations together to be able to negotiate and talk and avoid wars like this one. But during the negotiations, Wilson gets really sick. I believe he gets Spanish flu. And his health and his mind begin to deteriorate the worse the flu gets. And it doesn't kill him or anything like that, but he's not able to negotiate with the same ferocity and power. He's not as sharp as he used to be. His mind breaks down as well as his body. So Britain and France get what they want. They punish Germany for the war. And this leaves Germany in really, really horrendous conditions, right? What does this punishment of Germany, the tanking of their economy, do for the German people? What does this lead to? Punishment of the Treaty of Versailles. Do you guys know? Like, there's a reason Hitler gets to rise to power, right? And it's because he takes this Treaty of Versailles and the ruined economic depression in Germany, and he picks somebody to blame, right? He's going to blame a group of people. He's going to like the reason that he rises to power in part is because of what a bad place Germany is in at the end of this war. So the treaty is very harsh. Congress does not ratify now we're back to the United States. Congress doesn't ratify the treaty because they don't want to join the League of Nations. They say, hey, if you join the League of Nations, we might have to fight wars that we don't want to fight in without congressional approval. So Wilson gets the League of Nations made, but the United States does not join the League of Nations. Funny story there. And Germany is punished for the First World War, foreshadowing, going to lead to the second one later. And that's about where we're at. So that is the end. I'll give you about a minute and a half, and then we'll talk about exit tickets. Yes, people were desperate for money. People were desperate for everything. I'm not kidding when I say it tanked the German economy. And this guy this guy comes around. He's a very good speaker. He's a very formidable politician. He's got a cool mustache. And, he gives them somebody to blame, as horrible as it sounds. And then you get the rise of Nazism and Hitler and devolving. In World War II, there is a bad guy. There's no question about it. There are bad guys. There's like an ultimate bad guy. World War I, that's not the case. But everybody knows that this is a bad, you guys know what appeasement is? There's a period before World War II starts where Britain and France are trying to give Hitler the stuff he wants. So there is no war, and it's called the era of appeasement. And nobody wants to fight another world war. They're trying to avoid it at all costs. And with hindsight, appeasement was bad, but it's just nobody wants to do it again. And it's going to happen in like 20-ish years, depending which country you want to ask. All right, so that is it for this slide. That is it for the lesson. Let's talk about the exit ticket. The exit ticket's already posted on Google Classroom. You should have already been able to see it. 3 straightforward questions. Identify and explain how the situation in Europe led to a 4-year global conflict. Identify and explain how the role of the United States was in the conflict. What role did the United States play? And then identify the efforts of Woodrow Wilson during peacetime negotiations. So what did Woodrow Wilson do at the peace talks? You've got about 5 minutes left in this class. Make sure you complete your exit ticket. You are good to leave this call so long as you complete your exit ticket, guys. I'll be on here for a few minutes if you have any questions. But otherwise, you're good to go. Have a great rest of your day, guys. I'll see you all tomorrow. See you, Roman. Have a good one. All right, guys, if there are no questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the call. If you need anything, let me know on Teams. If you can't see the exit ticket, reach out to me on Teams. See you guys.